Coming soon. Creepshow.
Hello, how are you? And welcome to Josiah is Right About Film. So, a new episode, and I'm actually, which is, I rarely succeed at this in doing an episode that is themed around like the correct holiday. Usually it's like, oh, let's talk about a Christmas movie. It's July, which that kind of actually is a thing, Christmas in July. But this will be, we're recording this just before the beginning of October, and it'll release probably very soon in the next couple of days. So, it's actually seasonally appropriate. And we're going to talk about Creepshow today. And it's a movie that kind of like as Grant said before we started, and I'll introduce Grant in a second. It's not great cinema, but I think there's a certain nostalgia and like something about this movie that being a kid who grew up in the Pittsburgh area, especially when these films, the Night of the Living Dead films, anything made by George Romero, there's a sort of like ownership we have to it, I think, and that's like makes it kind of extra special. So like maybe if you're outside of that bubble, you'd be like, who cares about this? So, but I am joined today by Grant Lankard, and he is here with his Kickstarter memoirs of the morbid. Am I saying it wrong? Probably.
No,
So
that's correct. So
okay,
it's called Memoirs of the Morbid. This is the orange volume. I decided to go with colors instead of numbers for some reason. I guess I just want to confuse people. Um, I mean, there was a logic to it. The reason why I went with colors was because I didn't want people to think like you had to read volume one in order to understand volume two because they're all self-contained. But
got
I
it.
don't
That
know.
makes sense.
It seems like it causes more confusion than it does alleviate confusion.
At least the logic behind it is sound, Grant. I'll give you that. But I understand how, like, from the reader perspective, it then, like, oh, and now it doesn't make sense anymore. But I like you're coming at it from a place of logic, which is cool.
You
So,
want to know why I where I got the idea to do it like that? I don't know. You're probably about my age. I don't know if you remember when Image and Valiant did a crossover
oh, yeah.
and and it was called Death Watch. And instead of numbering the issues, they gave them colors because they like back in those days, all of the Image comic books were so late. They
Yeah.
had no idea when these comic books were going to come out. So like they didn't want to give like one of the issues a number one just in case like number two came out before number one.
That makes sense. And I mean, and we're both in the, indie comic space, so you understand that there's times where, especially when we're like sort of, bootstrapping it, doing it on our own with Kickstarters and things, where you do the schedules get thrown out the window sometimes. But
Yeah.
find it right now as this episode is live on Kickstarter. And then if it's after that point, there will be links and stuff so you can find that other stuff from Grant. So let's talk about Creepshow. So Creepshow was released on November 10th, 1982.
They missed October.
Yeah, they missed
What
October
were
of all things. They made it like a Thanksgiving movie.
what were they thinking? They would have had to have done is released it like 2 weeks earlier and they could have gotten it there in time for
Yeah, you
now.
wonder what the purpose of that was. It didn't even occur to me when I wrote that down. But yeah, that's like a huge miss. It's like, okay, yeah, just 1 week earlier. Yeah, like ten days. If you get it just on the 31st or whatever. At an $8 million budget, it did still make $21 million in its total gross, which probably would have been more had it come out in October, as you said.
Think about how much more money that they could have made.
Oh, I mean, I don't know what, you're just comparing time, but you imagine that's a lot of money. But of course, like it'd be interesting to go back and look, okay, what was now knowing that now, it's like, okay, what was released? What was, it going against? Why was it, what were the decisions that went into that very odd slot for it to be released?
Right.
Because then the other time for like any kind of like at least now in terms of like horror movie releases, it's like after the new year, that like Valentine's Day, February thing. I don't know if it was a thing in the early 80s, but that would be like now the way they might release it, which makes sense if you're not going to get it out for that window full of Halloween and it's not like a summer movie and it's November, just the weirdest time for to drop the movie. So
That's
filmed in Pittsburgh, Fox Chapel, Monroeville, Carnegie Mellon University, and New Jersey, where because there's if there's a beach scene, and there's definitely not a beach in Pittsburgh. At least there's like sand next to some of the rivers. As a kid, I would go to I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a beach where there was sand on the edge of the river, and we'd like play in the river water, which in retrospect was probably pretty unsanitary. But so, directed by George Romero with a script from Stephen King. And that's kind of the other big deal about this. Like, it's inspired by all the Tales from the Crypt comic books. And, looking back, this is before, like in the later 80s, Tales from the Crypt became a series again on HBO. And then through the 90s, there was a few movies released. So, this was, lost to time in the 1950s with the EC Comics and all that stuff. So, Creepshow was like, harkening back to that time. It's an anthology film, so there's a lot of different actors in it. Hal Holbrook, Adrienne Barbeau, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson are kind of some of the standouts that I just, the caliber of this compared to some other Romero films in terms of the actors in it. Like you can see that there's like even Ed Harris is in it. Although he was also in like Knight Riders, I believe, at the time with Romero, but Ed Harris is in it, and he's almost like just like there, like
Yeah,
he's in.
Ed Harris has some very interesting dance moves. I'll put it
Yeah.
that
It's like weird to think of like, like Ed Harris because I think, our generation is probably he's iconically, the dude from Apollo 13, I think is like where like what you think of him to see him in like this like evil sort of yuppie, I guess he was in this.
Yeah, I
Um
think it was something like he was friends with George Romero, and I mean, this was before he was famous, but even at this point, I think he thought that he was a little bit too good to be in this movie.
yeah, and I can see that from even that the whole performance and
Yeah,
so
I mean, I don't think that he's using even 10% of his acting
no,
skill.
exactly. Yeah, it's very much like going through the motions. Like it's almost like okay, here's an obligation for you. Um, it also has the interesting thing to me, which I just discovered in this, is the kid who is the main kid. Who I thought, man, that kid is. I don't like to like insult a child actor, but when the child actor is now like in their 50s, that's fine. The kid, I'm like, oh, he's really bad and cheesy and over the top. And then I'm like, oh, it's Joe King. He was credited, but he's Joe
Yeah.
Hill now, very famous, successful, talented writer on his own. But he maybe not on his own. I mean, you know, Dad, I'm sure helped. Like
I mean,
I
I think
saw.
he's a good writer. Like, yeah, he probably wouldn't be famous if not for
Well, I
his.
saw a whole thing where I don't want to go down this path but Stephen King and like they were talking about how he's like, well, he made him, reach out on his own and do all this. And it's like, yeah, but he knew the people to talk to, if nothing else. Like you like you can acknowledge okay he still earned things but yet as a parent like you provided something that like other writers didn't have and I don't mean to
No,
diminish but you
for
can't.
sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get, like you said, I don't want to get into the whole like nepotism argument.
Yeah,
But yeah, but of course, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's been proven if your parents work in a particular field, you're whatever percent more likely to be more successful.
exactly. And produced by Richard P. Rubenstein, who that kind of was Romero's producer at this time, and they kind of had the weird like sort of falling out later on, but it was Rubenstein's kind of gone on. He like did like a lot of Stephen King producing through this, and this is kind of the start of that. Like different TV movies, The Stand, both versions of them, the '90s version and the more recent version that came out for like before Paramount, like CBS access, some streaming service that is already gone. He's produced Dune recently, but the interesting thing with
Oh,
him was I had a film festival and we did an event in Pittsburgh and part of that event was supposed to be a screening of Dawn of the Dead. But apparently he's very controlling of those. So he doesn't like let the like you won't it's hard to go to a screening of that movie because he controls like the distribution of it. And
wow.
so we couldn't screen that movie. So we did end up screening Day of the Dead instead at the Oaks in Oakmont, if you're familiar with it. But
Yeah.
because of this guy, and I didn't know until after the fact, we're just like working with the theater to try to like show this movie and it's like he wouldn't let it happen and it's not just like it's just a thing he doesn't very rarely lets happen. It's just a strange thing. I don't know the specifics of why, but Yeah, so that was like it affected us, but we did do a screening of Day of the Dead, and this it's cinematography, and this is by Michael Gornick, and he was actually at our screening, so I actually got to meet him there. But he at the time he shot Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, Creepshow, and Day of the Dead for Romero. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't seem like he's gone on to direct, so maybe he is shot it, did the cinematography for his own stuff and wasn't credited, but he's not credited anything else as a cinematographer. So he's kind of like worked as a director and things, but only for Romero was he credited as a cinematographer. Um,
Hmm.
so, oh, and each segment had basically, there's a couple overlaps, but each had a different editor. And just the one of note was Paul Hirsch, who is most famous for kind of being one of the editors. Him and Richard Chew, who kind of came in and saved Star Wars in the edit when it was like a big mess, and so they came along. So Creepshow. Now we already talked about this. It's kind of funny. We both came to this conclusion separately, and Grant brought it up. But I'll start with it that we both have kind of more affection for the sequel, and but we'll start by talking about the first movie. So um, just in general, what is it that stands out to you about this movie, and why like you kind of shared, it's not great cinema, but and I agree, but there is something about it that does kind of hold up well, at least parts of it better than others. So what is it that for you that does work in this movie? I guess I'll frame it that way.
I mean, I think the premises of each story are really interesting. I don't know that um, like necessarily uh, the acting or anything else is really great. There is some interesting lighting. Like it feels like they're trying to imitate um, some of the color choices from like some of the later uh, uh, Creepshow comic books. Um, but yeah, I think that there's some interesting ideas. I don't know if the acting is great or the dialogue or anything like that, but yeah, I don't know. I also think it was kind of innovative in trying to make it seem like a comic book come to life.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I noted because I feel like now you kind of if that's done, it's like kind of done to death, and especially in comic book movies because they're so prevalent now that this is when every other movie wasn't somehow related to comics, where now it's like every other movie is somehow related to comics. So certainly for that time, it was definitely unique and created a unique visual style to it. I think like there's the parts
And
where like the color will go out and it'd be a background like this, and that color goes out and it be like a bright color, like it just like
well,
changes that feel.
the movie starts with them kind of like flipping through a comic book, and then it switches to animation. And I remember reading somewhere that they tried to go directly from the comic book page to the scene for like the live action scene. Too difficult to go to line up the art from the comic book to the live action scene, and so they added the animated scenes um, to kind of like segue. And again, I'm not sure why that is. I'm just telling you what I heard.
Yeah.
Like
Like whether or
from
not it's like was a technical challenge or it was like just an aesthetic choice where they're like, oh, it's not working. We need, some kind of like transition piece. Like, okay, we go from comic book panel and then live action, or is it like,
the article that I said that it was definitely a technical choice in that they couldn't figure out how to like they couldn't line up the live action scene perfectly with the panel from the comic book. But I mean, I don't understand why that would be so difficult because it seems to me like you could just take um like a still shot from the live action scene and trace over it. But I don't know.
because even like yeah, I mean, because you're doing all this compositing, editing, all the stuff is on film, so there's certain challenges to doing that, and I'm sure budget was one of them, right? If they had the money to do more, like I'm sure they would have, but that's probably a part of the consideration because like it says like well, I looked up the budget estimate $8 million. I don't know if it was that much money in this movie. Like,
Yeah, I mean
and
they
if they
got quite.
did, it's a lot of that's probably in the cast that they had.
Yeah, I was going to say they got quite a few big name actors. I mean, Ted Danson wasn't as big of a star as he would be like even a few years later, but I mean he was already on Cheers by the time this movie came out. So I would imagine that that was a pretty good get. And of course you had Leslie Nielsen, who was a pretty big star, and Adrian Barbeau, who was a pretty big star. Hal Holbrook, who would be considered probably like one of the better like character actors at the time.
Yeah, but it's just interesting, and I think that the challenges, and it's funny now that like that would be something where it'd be pretty straightforward and easy to do with digital technology, but again, cutting on film. So and with that, like the first segment we have is I believe it's called Father's Day. I didn't write the segment. I wrote them down in my word. Like I have in my notes, I have Father's Day, Vines, and Ted Danson. That's how I like remember the segments, but at least on this page. But with Father's Day, it's funny because I thought that it's very like cheesy comic book. Like some of these are some of them like the tone kind of moves a little bit depending on sort of the actor. Like Hal Holbrook, he is so good that it makes it all more believable around him, right? In his segments. Like he just has this quiet intensity about him. But then I feel like we mentioned this, I don't know, maybe it was before we were recording, but how Ed Harris is like kind of just there going through the motions and weirdly dancing. So you have like different, and I felt like this segment, even though it has the most probably iconic image from this home with the corpse of the dad, overall the segment to me is maybe the weakest, especially to start with. Like it doesn't like I felt like I was just wanting to get, and maybe it's because I've seen it before, where I'm like wanting to get through this one so I can get to like, oh, I want to see Stephen King covered in vines, and I want to see when Ted Danson, is like trapped in the sand. Those things that come later that I thought that I still think are better and more entertaining versus this one. So
Yeah, I
for the
don't
Father's Day, so
disagree with you. I mean, I would say at least this segment is very short.
yeah, yeah. But again, and I feel like it's because of that, like you have like what became basically the poster for the film. And I wonder if that's what determined like that image is like, okay, we need this out front. Because it's kind of funny when I talked about again having the film festival, and I was by no means an expert at it, and it was a small festival, and we were focused mainly on like indie short films that could then become comic books. And my company no longer exists. We kind of, went under several years ago, but that was kind of always the goal. So it was kind of a similar theme, and we get like little scary short films and stuff submitted to us. But I always you were always like faced with the challenge when programming. It's like, okay, what order do you have these films in? Because you want to start with something really strong, and then you want to build, but you have to be careful of like lulls in the middle when you would like screen a big block of them. When you're screening several short films that end up being 2 hours, right? That can become a drag if you have certain films that make it go a certain direction. It's like, like a playlist or something. You want to have certain rhythms to it. And I just thought that that was an interesting choice that to me didn't work as well as it could have, because like I really like the Vines one. It's like ridiculous and Stephen King's super over the top, but that's what's fun about it, right? If you like just go into that, like how as overacting and cheesy as he is, like it's fun. And it's like, you get that it's like this is like a dark comedy where he's imagining going to the college, and he's like, then each time he imagines it, the different scenarios, while meanwhile he just is continuing to get wrapped up in all this. And I honestly, that one, I think that one, there's a relevance to it today. I think that speaks to our sort of modern isolation where we're often online all the time, and then online slash in our heads, and we're like getting little nuggets of information, and we get into like these places wherever whatever biases we have are like just reinforced, and often the worst. And then these platforms that we try to promote our indie comics on, you know basically perpetuate like the worst information that's always often wrong. And so you get stuck in that. And I think that this segment like felt like that, where you're being consumed by these vines. So I guess watching it through a lens of being a 40 plus year old grown man and enduring the world in 2025 made that a different experience. So
Yeah, so um yeah, so as you said, you kind of moved on to talking about the second segment, the lonesome death of Jordi Verrill, I think, which is based on a short story by Stephen King called Weeds, and it is the acting debut. And I don't think he ever had a major acting gig ever again. His acting in this is definitely a choice. Yeah, I don't. It. I mean, I'm I'm torn on his acting performance because, like you said, it's so ridiculously over the top that it's fun. I mean, I'm never. It's kind of what keeps me from ever being like actually afraid during this segment. Like, I don't think anybody could could ever argue that they're actually afraid while watching this segment, just because his acting is so over the top, so ridiculous. It through 2025 lens, it might be offensive because he's clearly, how do I say this? He's clearly doing a caricature of somebody who's mentally challenged.
yeah.
Um, so that's kind of problematic. Um, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any more thoughts
No, and
on
I
that?
think no, I think that speaks to something though, where there's also the reality of like Stephen King at the time was probably coked out of his mind, like that was the reality of his life at that time, and so I think that's probably a factor in any decision he's making creatively. But I think it also, as much as like I kind of like the cheesiness of it, like I think maybe as a kid that's what made me be able to watch it and not get scared. But now as an adult, looking back and like you said, the performance, the character of someone that definitely would have some kind of mental disability, the character that he's playing, that is definitely an issue because it's not remotely sympathetic either. It's not like nuanced, and probably Stephen King, as sober as you can be, wouldn't be capable of the kind of performance that would make that work. But also,
Right.
like I think that speaks to maybe what's a problem with this film overall is a little bit of an inconsistency with the segments, right? Some of them lean into the scariness, or at least try to, right? Like Ted Danson, Leslie Nielsen, it's all taken very seriously, right? And I believe Galen Ross is in that scene as well, which Romero stuff, going back to Dawn of the Dead, but they play it straight, and Stephen King doesn't. So then you have like this huge tonal shift from this thing to this thing, that it's like almost like jarring. And what you said, like no one's going to be scared by that, which, me as a child, I like that fact. But me as an adult is like, wow, take this premise. I didn't realize it was a short story. I'd be interested to read it now. That it could be super, super terrifying. Like that
Yeah.
idea that this thing is now like consuming you and covering you, and he's like the way he's like with his fingers, and when it cut to the shots, like the little blisters, like that could be scary, but because of everything around it, it comes off as silly, right? So it would play totally different. And then, but then again, the other issue is how it kind of plays counter to the rest of what's going on in the rest of the other segments.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the standout, I think, is um you can help me with the name of it because as I said, my note I wrote down Crate, but the Hal
So,
Holbrook, Adrian Barber. So what's the proper name of that one, Grant?
so there's actually one before that.
Oh, I skipped one.
Yeah.
Oh, I
So,
skipped Ted Danson, right?
something to tide you
Yeah,
over.
Ted Danson.
Right. So, yeah, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, it's like the idea is Ted Danson is sleeping with a married woman who happens to be married to Leslie Nielsen. People forget that um, Leslie Nielsen before Airplane was actually considered a dramatic actor. Um, like not just dramatic, but very like a very intense dramatic actor, which is part of why his performance in airplane is so funny. Um, I mean, I think it's funny even not knowing that fact, but knowing that he was like a super serious dramatic actor before that makes it even more funny. Um, so the idea is, he points a gun at Ted Danson and tells him to go out on the beach with him, and then he tells him to, dig a hole on the beach and to get into it. And he at this time they didn't have like obviously the technology is like so archaic compared to what we have now. He uses like a super long electrical
Like
cord.
that's on the back of the Jeep. That was like, yeah, the first time because even when I was rewatching it, like I kind of forgot. I remember that there was the screens, and I'm like, why is there something behind the Jeep? Like, but I didn't,
Yeah.
remember that aspect of it. It was a very, yeah, like I guess they had to account for it in a way, but it was a strange, because yeah, he's buried on the side of the beach, and there's an electrical cord running from the house, I presume, back to him, that coming out of like a like a spool on the back of his Jeep. So it was a strange like way to do it, but at the same time, like okay, they're accounting for the real life logic, in some aspects here. So
Yeah, and so he buries him up to his neck, and uh, he records him, as the tide comes in, and he also is showing while he's doing that, he's also showing video of of uh, Ted Danson's girlfriend, his wife, she's suffering the same fate. I'm assuming further down the beach, but I mean, it's a really horrifying premise. I mean, just imagining that happening to you um, is just really, really terrible, right?
yeah, and there's a part where he like, he's once he's in the sand and he's like he talks about, well, maybe you can push out with the tide when it put like, and then the sort of, these are, the Tales from the Crypt sort of thing. Each of these has that sort of like twist ending, usually with like, the comeuppance sort of thing where then they as like rotting, corpses covered in seaweed, like lurch through the house as Leslie Nielsen is in his very like sanitary clean house too, and he has like he's very like video monitory sort of obsessed as he's walking, he's showering, just kind of countering like the cleanliness versus like these lurking creatures of that were Ted Danson and I believe it was Galen Ross that come in, and then of course like we're a boogeyman, and then of course it ends, but like that sort of come up it's of each of most of these segments where like the bad person gets theirs, like that's which is a very Tales from the Crypty kind of thing. There's usually that little that panel at the end that's like, you see, and like this is that one for this segment. So
So for me, the this segment should fade away, like right as Ted Danson like the waves are starting to splash up in Ted Danson's face, because to me that's scarier than the idea of these like zombies coming back to life. I mean I know that that makes it less accurate to the creep show aesthetic where it was like the bad guy always had to be caught at the end. But to me, that's the scary part of this story, and the whole zombie thing felt kind of tacked on at the end. Like they just needed, they felt like they needed something supernatural.
yeah, and honestly, like you said, like this is there's a lot of tension in this segment and with all that, and I feel like once that water's coming and maybe you like left with that ambiguous feeling of what's gonna happen, like, and it just goes on, whereas then it's like almost like in a weird way them coming back takes away from the impact of that setting up all that fear and tension, because then it's just like the, oh, now he's got to get his, and it's like just feels disconnected, and like that it felt like, oh, again, like the tonal shift in this segment where you have this very serious the intensity from Leslie Nielsen. Like as you said, he was known as a dramatic actor. This is after Airplane, but before the Naked Gun movies really firmly established that as like him then making everything is like, playing off the like, he's now known as he is a comedic actor, like for like to many of our generation because of those movies, right? And so I think that that almost undermines that part of it too, like that it hurts it a little bit because it's like the seriousness that they built is now, oh, here's the cheesy part. It's like almost like the obligation of having it or something.
Yeah. So this, so I think Stephen King wrote this segment as well, but I don't,
He
this
wrote
isn't,
all of it. I don't know if it's based on anything, but he did write like, he's the only credited writer for the screenplay. So,
so this reminds me of a short story that he wrote where the idea was like, the husband of a cheating wife has a guy, he points a gun at him and makes him walk along the edge of the building that he lives in. And he tells him, like, if you can make it all the way around the building and to the other side and back to this window, I'll let you in and you can go away and you can have my wife and run off together. But the point is, he has Stephen King has like kind of a theme with a lot of these stories,
mhm.
and it's also something where it's like with this movie, it feels like there are no good guys and bad guys, which I find interesting because, I mean, at first glance, Ted Danson seems like a pretty stand-up guy. Like, I mean, he's like the innocent victim in this. But then you think about, well, I mean, he was sleeping with a married man's wife. Not to say that he deserves his fate, but just to say that, like, there really are no good guys or bad guys in this movie. They're all kind of horrible.
Yeah, yeah. It's like at best, it's like shades of gray for everyone, and some are darker gray and lighter gray, but everyone's gray, right? So, and jumping into that, I think, well, maybe the one kind of sort of exception here in the next segment with, I have it written down as the crate, in my notes, but the Hal Holbrook with the monster under the stairs in the crate. The one kind of exception is probably, his friend who's the professor that he kind of has to drug.
Oh, I
He's
don't
kind
think
of the
so.
most redeemable character in the movie. Not that he's a good guy, but
The professor is trying to flirt with the one student in that one scene, though.
oh yeah, and
Um,
that's true, and that's how he justifies. See, like yeah, even he's a jerk, and that's how like, and that's how he then justifies when he gets her to come, like oh, there's a student that he had an affair with, and she needs you to talk her out of from under the stairs. Like that was yeah, you're right. So even he was a jerk. So
so that I mean, to me, that scene is fascinating, and that whole detail is kind of interesting because the look on his wife's face, I kind of read it as she the way he's able to talk her into doing this is that she's just kind of like titillated by the whole kind of trashiness
yeah.
of the situation, and she's like, "Oh, I want to find out about this college student having an affair with a much older man," Um, and again,
Exactly. It's not like an appeal to like her humanity to help this poor young girl who's been taken advantage of and abused by this person. No, it's like, oh yeah, like let's go see the fireworks show kind of thing, right? That's like her motivation to go to this. Yeah, it's sad. So
yeah, and that it, yeah, and again, it does kind of feel like the supernatural elements are kind of like less interesting than um, the the dynamics of this guy's marriage, where it's like he's a relatively successful college professor, married a younger woman, probably thinks his life is great, and then for whatever reason, this woman just kind of becomes an alcoholic, not just an alcoholic, but kind of a shrew of a woman.
And this in like the as you said again the supernatural elements and maybe it's like seeing the monster too much and things kind of make like detracts a little bit because you see that okay this is clearly like a 1980s creature special effect on a somewhat constrained budget compared to certain other 80s movies that we could compare it to. But I think that this has the most shocking, powerful moment is early on when they're at that party and he imagines just shooting her in the head. Like that really like when I was watching this with my wife and we're both like, "Whoa, holy crap, look at that." Because I feel like maybe I probably grew up watching the censored version of this on television when they re-aired it. So that was almost definitely not in the movie, right? And then you don't see a lot of the monster cutting and like, attacking. You don't see some of the blood from this and some of the like the images of like, gnarly bit necks and ripped up stuff. And this segment kind of leans most into the violence of the horror. And those things work pretty well, but then you have like a monster face kind of like that then like I think maybe me watching it now detracts from it.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, I think this is the best segment in all terms, in terms of like the way it's shot and like the way it's lit. I know that Romero famously almost made the Resident Evil movie, and whenever he was working on that, and he had an assistant of his like play through the game, right? At the time in like the 90s, and then he would like watch the video of the game when he was working on it, and he would like basically say, "You stole all my stuff, like the shots and stuff," and I think watching this again, there's so much Resident Evil in these segments and like the stairwell and stuff. It felt like the Resident Evil, like, when you're in these stairwells and the funny thing is in Resident Evil, in the stairwells, if you played the game, that's where those crates would be that you could like store your stuff because your inventory was always like only like six things or eight things or whatever in the old PlayStation games. So you it would go to a stairwell that had a checkerboard floor a lot of the time like that and these gross muted colors, and then there would be a crate in the corner and then the typewriter was how you would save. But like that I could see so much of this in Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2 in the police station. So it's just interesting to think that because like Romero was talking about how he took his stuff from like these other movies, like I see a visual inspiration here as well with what became Resident Evil in the 90s. This is also one though where kind of interestingly though he does not get his comeuppance. The Professor Hal Holbrook. He eventually he gets his wife gets he kills his wife. If you haven't seen it, I guess we're spoiling the movie, but you've had 45 years or whatever it is, or less than that. It's my age, 43 years. So he then he kills her and then he lies to his friend and he takes the crate and he drops it off a cliff into this water and thinks, oh, it's all chained up and it's fine. And he tells the other guy that don't worry, it'll never come, it's impossible the way I chained that thing up. And then of course it cuts to like under the water, it breaking free, and then that's where it ends. So there's the hint of that he might get his come up, but you don't know, right? Where is this thing gonna come back and find him? Like it's just left a little bit more ambiguous. So
So can I ask, how do you feel about Adrian Barbeau's performance? Do you think it's cheesy and over top in a good way, or cheesy and over top the top in a bad way?
there's times where I think it's really good, and there's times where I think it's really bad. I think it's a really inconsistent performance in the segment because like the way she's playing, like I think when she play there's a scene like later on when she's like plays mean and cruel, it's great. But when she tries to be drunk, it's like she's a person acting drunk. And I think that like doesn't work as well. But then, for example, whenever she finally goes to the stairwell at the end and like right before she gets killed, the speech she has for him and the way she like digs into him, she's great in that scene, like in that last scene. But she's just like spitting this venom at him, and it's like from a like it seems like from a performance point of view, she's less occupied with oh, I have to be drunk and play this drunk. I'm just like, she's just like unleashing this anger and this resentment that's built up for her husband over all these years, whatever it is. And I think that that part is great. So I think it's a bit inconsistent. So that would be my answer to that. There's times where it's like when she's just leaning into the meanness, she's just really believable, but there's times where she's like playing drunk that it seems like she's playing drunk. That's kind of how I felt. What about you?
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, I think it's over the top. Um, and at times I think it's over the top in a good way. Other times I think it's over the top in a bad way. Um, yeah.
And so we'll move on to our last segment, which I wrote down as bugs, um, where the guy is in where the guy is in his isolated townhouse, upper, fancy New York style penthouse apartment, and he lives in this sort of, Howard Hughes like isolation.
Yeah,
And of course,
I was gonna bring up Howard Hughes, but I mean it's obviously based at least partially on Howard Hughes, right?
yeah, and again, like, I could have sort of think like this segment I didn't enjoy and felt like it's a better premise than the execution. And I think that that was the thing. Like, for example, like, and this might just be a strange, weird thing for me. It's like the apartment seemed grimy already to me. Like it didn't have like a like, and it's like maybe it's because of the aesthetics of like them making this in the in the early 1980s. It didn't have like this pristine enough look to it, so that it didn't have the feel that like of cleanliness. I know that sounds strange. So, but it just didn't have the like the contrast I think it needed. Like it needed to, like to be like feel like a room with like almost like nothing in it and pure white walls or something, where everything it just something about it didn't work on that level for me. So therefore, when the bug invasion comes to him, and it just didn't vibe as well. So
I mean it's interesting because I mean it's a one location shot and it's practically just one actor. Um,
yeah,
and
and then you have like basically the other performers are like sometimes over the phone and then a few like at the door. And like when they're at the door, it's like that's where it is interesting. He has like the peephole thing is like this magnifying glass, and when you see like the maintenance guy or who works for the building, maybe he's the the supervisor or whatever for the building, it's like his teeth are all like, really big, and it's clear like,
it
oh,
looks
I
kind
can't
of
get somebody out here until tomorrow. Like these people who are like clearly just cannot stand this person, but like have to like sort of play nice because of he has this great wealth and all this stuff and power apparently, because whatever he does. There's a great line though. He says this is maybe the one line I wrote down in the movie when he's on the phone. Like a woman says something to him, I forget, but he said, "Lots of people are going to rejoice when I'm dead. Who are you?" And it was just like great, like he doesn't even care that people hate him. Like he just hates everybody else. So I don't care that you hate me. So
yeah. So back to the Pittsburgh connection. Somebody was just telling me recently about there's an Andrew Carnegie biography called "I'll See You in Hell," where it was like later in his life, like Andrew Carnegie tried to convert himself into like this. It, Andrew Carnegie was like a really horrible, like cutthroat, like he didn't care who he had to screw over to make a dime. And then it's funny, like later in life, he kind of converted into this philanthropist, and he wanted everybody to forget about the first 50 or 60 years of his life. And the reason why the biography it says "I'll see you in hell" was he was trying to mend fences with another like multimillionaire friend of his, and basically the letter that this guy wrote back was like, "Look, we both know we're horrible people. I don't want to be friends with you. You don't want to be friends with me." Basically, and it's a fascinating idea. Like they they both know that they're horrible people, and they're both kind of okay with it in a
yeah.
way. Like it's yeah, it's a whole different way of thinking
Yeah, for sure.
in my life.
I hope so for most people at least, right? Um,
Yeah.
but this is also the only segment. So I was watching it with my wife. She like I think she like me was like, oh, I remember watching this as a kid and on television because she's not a horror person at all. And so she was watching it with me, and this was the only segment where she does not like bugs. So this is
Yeah.
the one segment where she's like, I'm gonna go in the other room now. So she like, and she was like engaged with the rest of it. Like we were talking about and watching this, but this is one where she left before, and which is the big reveal of this one where he then freaks out and he runs into his safe room, and then within his safe room where his in the this absolute body horror moment with 1980s budgetary special effects technology where the he's in the safe room which has this glass door. It's almost like a fishbowl type of thing, and the cockroaches like explode from his body, like in this like
Yeah.
from inside of him, and then the rest of the room is like pristine, like right the rest of his apartment outside the penthouse. So that was the for me the takeaway though is like I enjoyed it, but like again, I feel like this is the great premise that didn't work as well in execution. But I'll say there's a certain level of it working well on some people when my wife is like, I'm done watching now. And she'd been watching most of it with me and enjoyed watching it up to this point. So I think there's something about that, but it's just her thing with bugs. But at the same time, I think that's like a very visceral thing for a lot of people and in that way. So like even yesterday, so we were at a funeral and I had my hand on a tree as we're like waiting, for the burial. And all of a sudden I feel something on my hand and I pull my hand away. There's three little tiny ants on my hand. And it was like, I don't have a problem with bugs, but like that's a little bit of a freaky moment where like, ah,
Yeah,
and
you were
like,
gonna say lantern flies because lantern flies are everywhere this time of year.
no, really. um, but yeah, not in Southern California, but in your part of the world. So,
Yeah.
but, any other thoughts on, and yeah, we see, the Howard Hughes parallel is a lot, but you can any of those. There's a lot, probably a lot of people with wealthy men in particular in history who've like lost their minds at the end of their lives and were already horrible people, then became worse. And I think that there's a sort of fantasy of them getting their comeuppance that does not usually happen in the real world. That wealth protects them from consequence. So this is an example where there was this supernatural consequence for this character.
The scene where he's trying to talk his one employee into leaving his vacation in Disney World to come back and work at his house. I remember just thinking like, man, I have never liked any of my jobs enough to put up with this kind of bullshit. Sorry, am I allowed to swear?
You're good.
I have never like if a boss like ever talked to me like I mean I feel like that's one of those things that people do like in movies and TV and I feel like in real life most people would just be like you know what, this job really isn't that great to me.
Yeah.
uh,
It's kind of
for other
funny. So
jobs.
my dad actually used to work. He's a contractor, and he and my brother have like a kitchen cabinet business back near Pittsburgh, where my whole family still lives. And he at the time worked for Carnegie Mellon. He was a carpenter for Carnegie Mellon, and I remember specifically he would never ever ever answer the phone because if there were an emergency, like something broke or something like that on the weekends or time off, they would call different, people to be like, you got to come in and fix this thing. And, he was, and I don't know how they did it. I'm sure there was like a call list of, but we would always like, he would have us be like, okay, answer the phone and find out who it is. And then, I'm probably not here. Like that was like, I remember that with my dad. And it was kind of that kind of thing where it's like, no, he's like, my dad view was like, I'm not working. I'm done. I'm home. Like, if you want, find somebody to come in, call somebody else. And that was like that kind of the parallel in this. And then I guess the connection to Carnegie Mellon where, George Romero went, plus part of this movie was shot, the previous segment. And so just like that idea. It's like, yeah, like I cannot, and I've had jobs that where I've liked and I've worked, time on my own, like as a teacher, like you work like all over the place time wise, especially because my teaching is like purely online right now and asynchronous. So there's not even like a Zoom component. Like it's just like I build the class, they do the work, and I give feedback, and I do meet with students. But like with that, like I'll meet when they can meet. Like maybe they meet at 10 p.m. I'll make that work for them, that kind of thing. So like I'll do that, but like to go out of your way for this madman of an employer and an employer who does not treat his employees well because it's like you were at my service, right? You were at my beck and call to do what I need rather than like not even like that framing of it like we're building something with this company. It's just like, no, I need you to do this for me. And it's like a different mindset in that way. And it's just very abusive. And I think it's there's relevance to all of this in different ways that kind of like watching it now, again, growing up with it is a different point of view as watching it as an adult. So
Yeah, I mean, I just can't believe that he said like I want you to stop your vacation and come home. And um uh he actually, I mean, I don't know if he actually did it, but the fact that he would even like consider doing that is just insane to me. And but I mean, having said that, I have known people who are like that, where it's like, oh my God, my boss is calling me. He wants me to come to work today, and in my head, was thinking like, well, tell him no. Like,
yeah.
what's the big deal? Like, but yeah, I have known people like that.
And so with that, we then get back to our wraparound segment with Joe Hill, credit, Joe King, Stephen King's son, as the son. And the beginning of the, we didn't mention this, but the beginning, you have the framing device is the segment with the dad throwing the comic book in the trash and the kid very angry about that. And then in the end, we find out that it's the way this part plays is it's like the great, like kind of the more the comeuppance where it's Tom Savini is one of the trash guys, and they're looking at the comic which has been in the trash, and then there's like an ad for like the like voodoo dolls, and then we find out that then the dad is like in pain and suffering because then the kid has the voodoo doll, so that's like the final moment of comeuppance for him. But I think that it also speaks to what you said, where you think that they would paint the kid as the one sympathetic character in this whole movie, but even he is like not at all sympathetic. He's not like, oh man, I feel for this kid. Like he's the kid gets, maybe it's the fact that he's not a real performer or not a real actor, that he just you don't feel sympathy for him. He's just so mean and angry that
Yeah.
like because this comes out of like it's rooted in the 1950s when the hearings about like were comics destroying kids, and the Comics Code Authority came in as a way for the industry to self-regulate so the government didn't step in and all this stuff. And EC Comics took the brunt of that for their much more extreme level of like violence and these like sort of gross out images in there. And so this almost in a weird way like says, yes, that's true, these comics did make this kid evil. It's in a weird way where it's like, see, the 1950s, you were right, Congress, these comics made kids evil and they would kill their fathers with voodoo dolls. Which, if that's meant to be the joke, it's funny, but it doesn't come off that way.
Yeah.
So any other final thoughts on the movie itself?
Um, no, I know that there's a TV show now. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it would be fun if they kind of resurrected this. I guess they don't really need to resurrect it. Like I said, there is a TV show, but the I think that it just has a very interesting aesthetic. Obviously, like I said, I have a comic book that kind of borrows from the EC Comics, not not Creepshow specifically, but just the whole EC Comics aesthetic. Not just Creepshow, but Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, and I mean just the fact that we live in such um, a quick turnaround society, and the fact that we're still kind of parodying books from like the 30s, the 1930s and 40s. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're that's approaching 100 years, of yeah. And the thing is, um, it's kind of like when people talk about like, oh, the Simpsons predict things or certain things that are like, it's like not that it's like there's certain cycles in culture where things just happen again and people behave the certain way. Like authoritarianism can dominate because of cycles that we've seen in the past. It's not like some predictor, like Star Wars people talking about like like the particular with Andor and like it's the fact that these things are happen and have happened before and will happen again, unfortunately. And I think that that's why the themes in these things also hold up because they remain relevant. There are horrible rich people that are in isolation and take advantage of us. And it's worse now than ever with, and the irony is we use these platforms to communicate. Grant and I have never met in person. We know each other thanks to the indie comic community and Facebook. And there's maybe more bad than good, but it's like, okay, there's the good of that too. So like, hopefully we can together fight the good fight to be good to other people and talk about movies where people are not good to other people and they get their comeuppance. And we hope that when there are bad people in the world, they can get their comeuppance because it doesn't happen enough. But at least we can create art where the bad guys lose and the good guys win. So. But thank you, Grant, for joining me. I appreciate it. Anyone who is here, be sure to check the link. So, when are the dates on the actual Kickstarter? So, for right now, Grant.
So it's closing right after Halloween.
Okay.
It's the Monday after Halloween. It's gonna end.
Okay, cool. So this episode, you'll have us like a solid month to back it and support Grant. And then if you're seeing this 3 years from now or 20 years from now, you'll have links below to find Grant's stuff. Thank you so much to Grant for joining me. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and all that stuff. If you're a fan of Creepshow, share this with your friends, and unless they haven't seen the movie, because we do spoil it. But obviously, again, it's like this isn't. It didn't come out last weekend. So, but it
Oh,
also didn't come out before Halloween. It came out in November, which that's maybe the most shocking twist to this whole thing, discovering that.
yeah. Just so you know, we did talk before the show. I did want to mention one thing. So actually, most of my warm, fuzzy, happy memories actually come from Creepshow 2, which so when we were talking about this, like what movie do you want to do? I said like, yeah, let's do Creepshow because I honestly got this movie and the sequel confused. But yeah, the sequel is also fun. It's not quite as stylized, but I actually think it has a much better segment. Which that I mean that's the segment that everybody remembers, which is when they go to the lake to go
Yeah.
swim. There's like that killer slime.
Yeah, and that's one of the most impactful bits of horror I've ever seen. It's great. Yeah, like and I was talking about it again with my wife who isn't a horror fan and like didn't she's like, "Oh, I remember that." Like that stuck out for her and like again, yeah, the power of that scene. So, yeah, maybe we're teasing a sequel here for us to talk about that in depth, but any thoughts on like what makes that stand out for you then? Like why does that one hold up over this one, do you think?
Uh, I mean, I don't know why that's such a creepy visual. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this whole series of stories is that a lot of the stories take place in broad daylight, which is kind of shocking and weird, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. It's just so shocking that it happens, but it's also like I don't know. It's just the premise again of being in the middle of this lake and you're surrounded on all sides by this weird slime. Uh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
creepy.
No, and I think like you said though, that adds to the part of why these horror thing, at night we have this natural like what is in the dark corner just anyway. but it's also easier to execute horror when things are shrouded in darkness, right? And like you can't see things. Even, like in special effects terms like Star Wars, it was famously like, man, when they had to do Hoth versus the first Star Wars, everything is matted black against black, no big deal, right? Or against space. So when now it's like we have to do this in this bright white pristine field. How do we do these very carefully done, compositing and mats? And so it's a kind of a similar parallel where it's like, how do we do this horror that is just as effective and maybe even more so that it's in bright sunny, we're going to the lake for a beautiful day out, and then this horrible thing happens. And I think there's like parallels to that, to like um I believe which the Zodiac killer, and like some of his were by the lake, broad daylight. So, and especially maybe at that time we're coming, that was like in the 70s into the, we're now in the 80s. So like the horror of these bright, safe spaces during the day where I would be with my kids, you could be with your, and then boom, this horrible thing. And it works, and it's scary. So that segment does hold up, and hopefully we'll get to talk about it in more length. But again, make sure you check out where Memoirs of the Morbid from Grant and his other work. And I appreciate you joining me. And once again, thank you so much, man.
No problem. Thank you.
Creepshow. The most fun you'll ever have being scared.